Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is August 17th, Friday, and today we're going to be talking about Jupiter and Neptune, who are getting, both of the planets are getting together by a trine right now in the sky. So this is a pretty big event when two planets, slow-moving planets like Neptune and Jupiter, come into a long-standing trine with one another, which lasts weeks. It's a significant astrological event, and the archetypes involved with both Jupiter and Neptune are, worthy of some extra time and attention. So that's what we're going to do with our time today. Now, in addition to this, I'm going to be talking about only Jupiter and Neptune today, and a pretty wide variety of themes related to Jupiter and Neptune, both the positive and the potentially destructive or negative qualities of Jupiter trine Neptune, and some tips for how to kind of, I want to use the phrase work with, but how to be more consciously involved with the appearance of these planets and whatever they might be bringing into your life right now. I'm going to be drawing also on one of the Upanishads today, called the Sri Upanishad, and looking at what some wisdom from ancient Vedic philosophy has to say about some of the potential things that can come up as spiritual lessons for us around Jupiter and Neptune's trine. So the Sri Upanishad that I'll be mentioning at certain points today, of course, doesn't literally or directly mention Jupiter and Neptune, right? They didn't know about Neptune that long ago. It was not a part of the Vedas or the Upanishads to be talking about aspects and planets and things like that. But the spiritual philosophy within the Hindu tradition, or what we now call the Hindu tradition, really the Vedic philosophical tradition, comes from India, that region of the world, has a lot to say and a lot to offer us, and is a really, in my mind, a really great text to draw on for the Jupiter-Neptune trine. So we'll be taking a look at that today as well. All right, so let's start off with a breakdown of Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter is currently in the sign of Scorpio, has been since last fall. This November, it's going to move into Sagittarius. So we're winding things down with Jupiter in Scorpio, even though Jupiter in Scorpio is literally still in the middle of Scorpio. So it has a lot of ground to cover still within the sign of Scorpio, but it'll be covering it rather quickly. So it's already gone through its major retrograde period, which it does every year, and we'll be entering Sagittarius again in November. So we've all gotten to know Jupiter and Scorpio a bit over the past year, and we will spend time. In fact, I was just talking today to a friend of mine, Sean Nygaard, who's an astrologer, who's going to be doing a talk on Jupiter entering Sagittarius, and I'm hoping to get him for the fall speaker series. So we'll actually be able to spend a lot of time looking at Jupiter's entrance into Sagittarius as well. We'll wait and see what his schedule's like, but he's doing a whole talk on Jupiter and Sagittarius already, and then I want to try to double it up and have him come give the same talk for us at the Nightlight Fall Speaker Series. At any rate, Jupiter's been in Scorpio for a while, so we've all gotten to know it, and Neptune, of course, has been in Pisces for a long time as well, so nothing brand new about these planets within the signs that they're in for us at this moment. But there's a lot to be learned from their trine. Now, trines, as I've mentioned in many different videos that I've made before, are of the nature of Jupiter. And the way that you can tell what kinds of qualities the different kinds of aspects carry is based upon the traditional relationship of planets in their home signs to one another from the starting point of the sun and the moon. So if you imagine placing the sun and the moon at the very bottom of a wheel in whole sign houses, and every sign gets one whole sign house. This is an easy way to conceptualize it. And then you draw out the aspects from the moon going to the left toward the ascendant, and you draw out the aspects by whole sign from the sun going to the right toward the descendant, the first and seventh houses, and you just follow their aspects out around the wheel, you land at signs ruled by the same planets for each aspect that you arrive at. So, for example, if you go to the left of the moon and you head to the first sextile, you get to Taurus. If you head to the right of the sun and you get to the first sextile, you get to Libra. So the sextiles are said to be of the nature of Venus because those sextiles to Taurus and Libra are both two Venus-ruled signs. And then if you go out further from the left to the first square of the moon to the first square of the sun on the right and left, you get to Aries and Scorpio, which are Mars-ruled signs. So the square is said to be of the nature of Mars. If you go out to the left from the moon and from the sun all the way up to the trine, you get to Pisces and Sagittarius, which are the Jupiter-ruled signs. And then if you go all the way to their oppositions, you get to the Saturn-ruled signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. So we always have to keep in mind that the primary ingredient in terms of understanding just about everything in astrology are planets. Planets and the traditional 7 planets especially, it's like learning the basics. You can do all sorts of amazing forms of musical improvisation once you know the basics very well. Unfortunately, in some ways, my sort of criticism of modern astrology is that it's so filled with so many interesting tools that at times it lacks substantive use and understanding of the basics, which is one of the reasons that I went back to the basics myself and then kind of was taken by traditional forms of astrology, because I find that I'm doing much better astrology, much higher quality interpretations with my clients, and just better client work in general because I've returned to the basics. So always just remember that if you really want to understand an aspect, you have to break it down into each of its pieces and parts. You got to understand what it means that Jupiter is connecting to Neptune through a trine, and that trines are of the nature of Jupiter. That informs how you read what kind of connection the planets have right now. Sometimes in different forms of archetypal astrology, it's just planetary combinations. Well, put Jupiter and Mars together, and no matter what, it's just a Jupiter-Mars combination. You know, you have somewhere in the spectrum of different Jupiter-Mars combinations. Well, no, not really. In ancient astrology, if you have a square or a trine or a sextile or an opposition or a co-presence in the same sign, you'll have a very different kind of exchange, a different kind of relationship between the archetypal qualities, which will help you to become more specific. So that's one of my like little soapboxes. But when we're talking about Jupiter and Neptune, of course, we're talking about Jupiter in a water sign, Neptune in a water sign. Trines are of the nature of Jupiter, but they're always connecting whole signs of the same element. So you can connect the fire trines between Sagittarius, Aries, and Leo. The same with the earth signs and the air signs and like that. So this trine between Jupiter and Neptune features water, the element of water, and it features a whole lot of Jupiter. Why a whole lot of Jupiter? Because there's a trine from Jupiter. Trines are of the nature of Jupiter, and Neptune is in Jupiter's home sign of Pisces. Now, in modern astrology, you may also hear people say, oh, you know, Neptune rules Pisces. I would highly recommend not thinking of the outer planets in terms of the rulerships of the signs. The ancient language of dignities, of what planet rules what house and sign and like that, the ancient signs were actually called houses, and houses and signs were interchangeable in the whole sign house system, although their meanings were vastly different. Very important to just recognize that the outer planets can't just be shoehorned into the rulership scheme just because there are some nice archetypal associations between one sign and another. What we're really saying, if we study ancient astrology, if we're assigning Neptune to Pisces, for example, is that Neptune takes on some of the qualities of Jupiter's feminine abode. Okay, that's not good enough, because Neptune is not just Jupiter's feminine abode, and we can't give it rulership over Jupiter's feminine abode just because we see some nice associations. There's actually a huge plethora of different associations that, unfortunately, when we take Neptune to rule a sign, not only are we most of the time we begin using rulerships in a way that's fundamentally flawed because we don't understand how ancient astrologers were actually using the whole language of dignities and how they were used in interpretations. But also, we make the mistake of short-suiting the outer planet. The outer planet doesn't play by the rules of traditional astrology. The traditional astrology is like a complex calculus, and it has rules in much the same way that different kinds of musical scales have rules. So you can't just go changing those willy-nilly because you talk to your guide when you were tripping on mushrooms and the guide told you that Neptune ruled Pisces. And I'm not suggesting that that there was total carelessness on the part of the modern astrologers who made the association between Neptune and Pisces, but I do think that they couldn't have possibly been equipped to make that decision, not having had the vast majority of Hellenistic texts that we now have that tell us about how dignities were conceptualized and how complex and intricate the language was. So it's like you can't just because you discover a new instrument doesn't mean you can just quickly throw it into an orchestral arrangement. You have to do some thinking about it. I don't feel like that thinking has actually been done. That's another one of my soapboxes. There's that conversation could be a whole talk in itself, though. All I'll say for now is just think of Jupiter and Neptune getting together in their trine right now as a whole lot of water, as a whole lot of Jupiter, because you have two water signs, Scorpio and Pisces. You have Jupiter making a trine, which is of the nature of Jupiter, to Neptune, which is in Jupiter's sign. So you can think about it like that. So the next thing to think about is, of course, when you're looking at that relationship between them, you need to start breaking things down into parts. This is the most basic way for all students of astrology to begin learning how to speak more intuitively, more fluently about Jupiter and Neptune. Sometimes people say, astrology, it's like you're channeling something, or you're using your intuition or whatnot. But again, not really. There's an intuitive component to any kind of craft or art or skill that usually comes after a long period of practice. So, for example, when you see a great athlete or a great musician or anyone who has a really amazing talent and they appear very innovative, a lot of the times what they'll tell you is that behind that fluidity and creativity and originality was tons and tons and tons of practice on the basics. So similarly, in order to understand a Jupiter-Neptune trine, it's really important to break it down to the basics. That's why I said a whole lot of Jupiter, you can just see that right away. A whole lot of water, you can see that right away. And then we need to take piece by piece the range of archetypal meanings associated with each planet. So that's what we're going to do now. Let's take a look first at Jupiter. This is from Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, one of my favorite archetypal astrologers. Just a great book if you've never read it. Jupiter, the principle of expansion, magnitude, growth, elevation, superiority, the capacity and impulse to enlarge and grow, to ascend and progress, to improve and magnify, to incorporate that which is external, to make greater wholes, to inflate, to experience success, honor, advancement, plenitude, abundance, prodigality, excess, surfeit, the capacity or inclination for magnanimity, optimism, enthusiasm, exuberance, joy, joviality, liberality, breadth of experience, philosophical and cultural aspiration, comprehensiveness and largeness of vision, pride, arrogance, aggrandizement, extravagance, fecundity, fortune and providence, Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods. So that gives you a really nice summary of Jupiter. And again, why did I start off talking about taking it down to the basics and not thinking that to do a healthy astrological analysis, you just have to be really intuitive. Again, one of the reasons for mentioning that right away is because with so much Jupiter in the air, one of the specific things we're going to talk about today is how to be aware of those things that try to sell you on something that's smooth, that's easy, that doesn't require work, that is going to be natural and intuitive without any effort or discipline, that doesn't require any sacrifice, so that kind of aggrandized easiness and flow and fluidity. There's a positive side to all of that too, by the way, but the potential for us to get hooked by something like that right now, just taken out to sea, is really strong. And so one of the things that I'll be trying to do today, especially when I get into the Sri Upanishad with us, is to talk about the groundedness that we need in order to actually relate with this kind of energy in a healthy way, you might say. Okay, so let's talk about Neptune next. All right. This is also from Cosmos and Psyche. Neptune is associated with the transcendent, spiritual, ideal, symbolic, and imaginative dimensions of life, with the subtle, formless, intangible, and invisible, with the unitive, timeless, immaterial, and infinite, with all that which transcends the limited, literal, temporal, and material world of concretely empirical reality, myth and religion, art and inspiration, ideals and aspirations, images and reflections, symbols and metaphors, dreams and visions, mysticism, religious devotion, universal compassion. It is associated with the impulse to surrender separative existence and egoic control, to dissolve boundaries and structures in favor of underlying unities and undifferentiated wholes, merging that which was separate, healing and wholeness, the dissolution of ego boundaries and reality structures, states of psychological fusion and intimations of intrauterine existence, melted ecstasy, mystical union, primary narcissism, with tendencies toward illusion and delusion, deception and self-deception, escapism, intoxication, psychosis, perceptual and cognitive distortions, conflation and confusion, projection, fantasy, with the bedazzlement of consciousness, whether by gods, archetypes, belief streams, ideals, or ideology, with enchantment in both positive and negative senses. So, so that's a really important two passages that, again, that help us to begin our inquiry into a Jupiter Neptune trine by starting to understand what each of these archetypal symbols mean on their own. There's lots of similarities, of course, but they also have some real differences. For example, you could think one good image for Jupiter would be like a judge in their in the robes of the and the sort of costume and power of the bench, sitting on the bench, a high position relative to everyone in the room, lofty credentials, important societal role, decision-making power, the ability to confirm, and to be, having become a judge, you must have been confirmed. So there is a sense of pride and power that goes with Jupiter that is not nearly the same as what you generally feel from Neptune. That's one key difference. But there's also an emphasis on largeness, bigness, growing things, making things more, that, again, Neptune not necessarily is interested in. In fact, Neptune sometimes can be associated with that which is dissolved or dissolving, that which can dissolve, or that which may be dissolved. Things that fall apart, things that leak, things that seep, things that spread out, things that cover and hide, also mist and fog. So there's something that is decidedly more potentially sort of ambiguous or mysterious, and kind of ephemeral, and fleeting with Neptune. Of course, they share in terms of idealism, the religious or spiritual or philosophical impulse. There's some shared qualities between Jupiter and Neptune that are there as well, which is pretty cool. So I would say one of the things that people get excited about for this kind of transit is the idea of the dream, the expansion of your ideals and beliefs, the flow state or the creative fluidity, finding an organic way of doing something or being in the world. So to kind of counter what I was starting to say with, you have to start with the basics and break it down to the basics, we're going to keep doing, kind of keep coming back to the potential downsides of Jupiter Neptune. If one of them is things being too easy, the other side of it is when things, after you've worked on things for a while and you've plugged away at something, it is true that things will take on a natural quality of ease where you no longer are thinking about the notes you're playing. You're no longer needing to practice, in a sense, the same way that you did before. Your practice can also be a little bit more spontaneous. This feeling of the organic, the creative, and the flow state is, in fact, one of the virtues of Jupiter and Neptune that can come out of a transit like this. Good question. Someone's asking, how long does the transit last for? It's perfecting over the weekend. It's been in effect for weeks now, and it will be in effect for several more weeks as Jupiter slowly parts from the trine. So we're just kind of looking at it at the, at the sort of the crest of the wave. So, all right. Let's start talking about how the two planets can combine. First of all, the way that they are combining in a Jupiter-like fashion makes the connection bigger, grander, and in a sense more exaggerated, but also potentially more fruitful, prolific, or fertile. It makes it gives an aura potentially of real exaggeration, potential for the shadows of either planet of excess, pride, arrogance, delusion, intoxication become that much bigger with the trine. You have to remember that there is no essentially positive aspect or negative aspect when you take as a baseline the fact that ancient astrologers were basically looking at all aspects as indicators of different kinds of karma, different kinds of material descriptions of your material destiny. So there's no, a lot of the time in the New Age world, you hear people spending a lot of time trying to stand up for how much you can change your karma. Like your karma is changeable. Don't you can really change it. It's up to you. You can, like this. But for ancient astrologers, changing your karma was like, redesigning a sandcastle on the beach as the tide's coming in. You can do it all you want to, but it's really not the point. Where the real effort is made in a place that is less tangible, you might say. It's about your consciousness, not necessarily how you rearrange the material objects of your life or the material stuff of your life. And so we have to be really careful right now, because one of the things that can come through with this emphasis on grandness and bigness and like this is that I can do anything. I'm free. I'm fluid. It's all flowing. It's all coming my way. It's all natural. It's all like that. And when we're in that state, the tendency is to forget that whatever goes up comes down, that whatever you build will eventually be washed over. Not to be a pessimist, but we're talking about the propensity to be an out-of-touch optimist at the moment, potentially. Now, out-of-touch optimism, again, in the sort of New Age climate, often has to do with, I'm not accepting limitations. I'm not accepting of them because I think that they are, limitations are a part of an outdated way of thinking, or they're part of a belief system that I'm not going to take on because I find it oppressive, or it's limited, whatever. Nobody likes limits. And when this comes through, you can easily see this emphasis on freedom from limitations which may be a good thing. There may be some actual freedom to be found right now, some flow, some fluidity, some natural expansive qualities, but also, again, the potential to lose ourselves in, different kinds of fantasies about our freedom that inevitably will cycle us into more karmic patterns just as much as anything else. So, for example, the person who says, you know what, I'm feeling so free, everything's so great, I'm going to make a big change in my life, it all feels great, and nothing's limiting me or whatever. Oftentimes, that same exact person, and I fall victim to this, I think we all do, you get kind of manic about what you can do or what you're capable of and the creative possibilities. And then, pretty soon you find that, you can't make rent, you need a couch to sleep on, things aren't going your way, the thing didn't turn out, your move out west didn't really work the way you planned it. Again, there you are again in a place of feeling limited. And then, you feel sort of like you want to curse the world for being so limiting and all the structures and all this, it's all problematic. But really, in many ways, the problem begins with us when we don't think carefully about what we're doing, when we don't plan for how something may not work out the way that we think it will, or when we don't carefully consider how what is the end game here? What if this doesn't work out, then what will I do? Or, so a lot of the times we take risks that are very much uncalculated and over the top during a Jupiter-Neptune trine, because we think we're invincible. We think the sky's the limit. We can do anything. This will last forever. This wave of success or inspiration isn't ever going to come down, right? But then again, eventually we have to deal with it. So let's start. One more thing. You flip that same exact qualities around, and let's say, for example, that you are receiving the inspiration or the emotional enthusiasm necessary to make progress in an endeavor where you have been limited. That's also a possibility, and obviously that could be a very positive thing. So those are some of the shades of Jupiter, Neptune you can think about right away. But they're different planets. They have some real differences. Important to emphasize those. The bigness of Jupiter and the dissolution, the tendency for things to dissolve with Neptune, often implies that there is a kind of karmic pattern with Jupiter, Neptune, where hubris will lead one into a kind of intoxicated state that there will be a ramification for later. And it's especially alluring with the trine because there's so much Jupiter in the air that how could anything go wrong? So you just have to be careful, a little cautious, a little moderate, but also if things are flowing along and opening up for you right now in a healthy way, just one of the easiest ways to check yourself is to just try to remain humble and in a spirit of gratitude for whatever opening and fluidity you're experiencing right now. And if we stay in that spirit, usually things will be okay. Okay, so here's a whole list of things that we can talk about with Jupiter, Neptune. Let's start with them. I have them bullet points on my notes today. They're the gift of insight. The gift of insight. Jupiter, Neptune can deliver some pretty profound insights, especially through things like dreams and dreaming, altered states of consciousness or spiritual practices, teachers or mentors, things like that. Jupiter, Neptune can introduce you to a spiritual text, a guru, a teacher, a connection to a sangha, a community of some kind. There's in the Bhakti tradition, there's a sort of trifecta of things that you're said to need to progress in your spiritual life, which is Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. You need the teacher, and the word guru means heavy. In a sense, it's the Jupiter is related to also in Indian astrology to the guru as a heaviness to Jupiter. Oftentimes in Jupiter in the first house, people will struggle with weight, for example. In their health house, they'll inflate, they'll get big. they'll struggle to keep weight off. The word guru means heavy, and also there's other etymological connections, but the word heavy for a teacher means that they're deeply saturated in whatever it is that they're doing. And so the potential right now with Jupiter and Neptune to become deeply immersed, to become heavy in something that you care about or that calls to you emotionally and spiritually, or that where there's enthusiasm and a sense of depth and a heaviness. But meeting teachers otherwise also good. Expanding your awareness or consciousness. Obviously, that's a possibility with Jupiter and Neptune. You have a planet of expansion, a planet associated with altered states of consciousness, other dimensions of consciousness that are sort of non-ordinary compared to the traditional 7 planets. So the potential for there to be a kind of deep and maybe empowering time of where your consciousness is growing, becoming illuminated sort of simultaneously, making greater wholes. You can think about how Jupiter generally is like rain. It makes, like Jupiter and Venus, like rain makes things grow. So Jupiter wants to confirm and make a larger whole, wants to incorporate into itself and make itself bigger. So one of the ways that you become good at anything, that you become knowledgeable, that you become heavy with a practice or a knowledge or a discipline, is by spending a lot of time with it. And oftentimes, many traditions like music or sports or art or an academic subject or a technical skill, there's many facets and components, right? Like in the Bhakti tradition that I study, or in astrology, there's thousands of years worth of texts and commentaries and saintly people that you can study and learn from, and different kinds of practices you can get into. But the more that you do, and the more that you become heavy in anything, the more that different kinds of wires start connecting in your brain, in your neural pathway. Your life starts to become a reflection of the amount of time you've spent into something. It gets heavy and it gets big. It has an aura of expansiveness to it, as though your life is a vast network or a library or encyclopedia of the kinds of things that you have immersed yourself into. And this could be something that's very physical or intellectual or whatever, but our lives take on and expand according to what we spend a lot of time with, according to what we become heavy with. So it's very important that we become sort of saturated with the right stuff, with the right program, you might say. We're running the right program, and making some choices, making some discernment between this or that or what have you. Very important. But one thing that can happen with this tendency to make greater wholes, to expand and make a more unified system, is that we're brought up, in some ways, it's the greatest gift that we have, being taught to value diversity, to value one another, and so forth, and to include, to be inclusive. That's very Jupiterian. But not everything works together or should work together. If you've ever been to someone's house who's trying too many different design ideas or aesthetic moods in the way that they've set up their furniture in their house, you can feel it. It just feels like the feng shui is off or something. There's too much here that's trying to be incorporated, but it's, maybe they should have cut some things out or made some choices and not tried so hard to include everything, right? So similarly, in our lives, I would say one of the great problems of the sort of New Age spiritual culture in general is the way in which it tries to include too much. Its error is in thinking so much about oneness and unity that a lot of the times each of us as people, practitioners, different forms of, sacred arts or studies or whatever, they become frustrating, maddening, and somewhat fruitless and meaningless because they try to include too much. That's not to say that that you should not be inclusive either. It's just to say that some healthy discernment will go a long way with the Jupiter-Neptune trine, because the tendency is sometimes to want to include too much, to do too much, to expand and grow too much. There's one of my teachers in the Bhakti tradition, this comes from a scripture somewhere, but I can't recall where, said that one of the sources of anger and frustration and agitation or irritation in the body and mind is when we are exposed to too many different conflicting philosophies. It leads us to anger, frustration, and irritation. And one of the easiest ways out of having to work and think carefully through the knots, much of which is caused by taking on too much too quickly, thinking and trying to study through too many different things at once. One of the easy ways out is that we say, well, it's all good. It's all fine. It's all part of the oneness, whatever, and then that's it. Then it's just, from there, though, we don't really push ourselves, in a sense, to commit to differentiate. Differentiation in Jungian psychology is incredibly important. Differentiation between yourself and the different kinds of archetypes and archetypal patterns that exist in the psyche within Jungian psychology, for example, is really healthy, because what happens when you're possessed by too many archetypes at once, you can't differentiate between them, and you try to take them all on and think of them as yourself, you go a little crazy. That's called madness. The same thing, madness. Too much leads to madness. What is Zeus's ultimate problem? What is, as a character in Greek myth, in the stagecraft of Greek mythology, you might say, what is Zeus's problem? He gets so inflated that he tends to become bellicose. He becomes belligerent. He becomes mad. He gets angry. So similarly, when we try to take on too much, and we don't do some healthy discerning and discriminating, the result is often madness. This can be a kind of divine madness with Jupiter and Neptune together, like the Mad King in Game of Thrones, if you ever read that book or saw the series or whatever. The idea of a kind of divine madness, or maybe in a slightly more positive sense, there's a kind of Dionysian flavor here, where Dionysus is intimately related to a god that is related to dismemberment, of all the parts being pulled out, because everyone gets so drunk and sort of high in this ecstatic state that it leads to a kind of madness and dismemberment. It's very similar to Jupiter Neptune. Neptune's a very Dionysian planet, in a sense, and Jupiter Neptune can amplify the thing to want to bring it all together, and some lacking of boundaries or discernment, and then it gets dismembered because of madness that's generated. So you have to think about that as well. All right, let's keep on going here. Dreams, dreaming, things getting too big. We talked about those. What is passed on through transmission? Association matters in this lifetime. We were just saying what program you're running really matters, and if you're trying to take on too many things, it leads to, it can lead to, well, either madness, or it can lead to you trying it can lead one to try to cut corners. So, for example, sometimes we try to, you try to hold too much, and then you start giving short shrift to certain things. So I can't tend to everything, so certain things start falling off here or there. You're not giving them the full treatment or attention they deserve. To try and keep it all maintained in some big hole, you start to cheat. So similarly, Jupiter Neptune can have the appearance of this grand big hole, but can also involve the need or desire to cheat in order to maintain everything. What's passed on through transmission? We are people of association, so association matters. Again, what what we surround ourselves with matters. We're going to become heavy with whatever we associate with constantly, and we can't help but associate with things constantly in our life. That's how we are. As souls, we get attached to something and we loop in familiar cycles, doing frequently the same thing over and over. Even the people who are really interested in freedom of expression and spontaneity and whatever are predictably that way. And they play their own obsession with spontaneity and creative freedom is also very predictable and cyclical. So none of us really escape being people who like things to be in a certain mode, even if the one mode appears more constricted and the other one more expansive or something like that. But the reason that I'm saying this is because Jupiter Neptune can make you aware of what you are associating with that has become big or that's inflated in your life. You can see it very clearly, like, oh my gosh, this thing, I have associated with it and it's taken on a life of its own. It's grown bigger than life. And so it's also an amazing moment to become aware of what and how you associate and how it's taken on some caricature around you. It's taken on some bigger dimension, and that could be a good thing, maybe not such a great thing. If you're associating with things that are very healthy, let's say spiritually speaking, you might start to notice that your life is taking on the aura of spiritual growth and change, health and healing, etc. If right now, if you're not associating with the greatest things, you may feel like, whoa, it's getting a little Frankenstein-y. Things are starting to, like, the dimension of my life is starting to take on its own life, and I'm not sure I really want that around me. Well, similarly, you can spread to others right now what you are associated with, and others can spread to you what they are associated with. So transmission is really important as well. This can even play out with Jupiter Neptune and things like infectious diseases and the spreading of different kinds of content that's good or not so good, or whatever, bacteria, viruses. This kind of the idea of influence itself being more. There's a kind of impressionable quality that we all have, or we can be more easily taken in by a Jupiter-Neptune trine, for better or worse. Now, there is also optimism and idealism, and dreams coming true. Dreams can literally come true with Jupiter and Neptune. Things that you've been fantasizing about can actually happen. And that maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's not such a good thing. It really depends on what your wish or desire is. I'm going to start incorporating a little bit of the Sri Ishopanishad now. Let's see if I can find the correct. Here we go. These are some really important verses from the Sri Ishopanishad. Just a little background on the Sri Ishopanishad as I'm going to incorporate it now as I keep going. This is the Shukla Yajurveda's final chapter. The Yajurveda is one of the main Vedas, one of the very most ancient spiritual texts on the planet, the Vedas. And the Sri Ishopanishad is one of the Veda's final chapters. It's this particular type of Veda, the Yajurveda, is comprised of prose mantras. And this particular Sri Ishopanishad is considered a primary principle, coming from a primary principle Upanishad. What else can we say about it? It's poetic. It goes back to thousands of years ago. It's very old, is older than astrology. Here's what Sri Ishopanishad says, though, in mantra 15, and I'll read 16 as well. O my Lord, sustainer of all that lives, your real face is covered by your dazzling effulgence. Kindly remove that covering and exhibit yourself to your pure devotee. And then similarly, O my Lord, O primeval philosopher, maintainer of the universe, O regulating principle, destination of the pure devotees, well-wisher of the progenitors of mankind, please remove the effulgence of your transcendental rays so that I can see your form of bliss. You are the eternal supreme personality of Godhead, like unto the sun as am I. So these two verses back to back have there's something really important about them. one of the things that comes up with Jupiter and Neptune is a kind of a feeling of having a grand spiritual vision, or of the kind of bigness, attractiveness, and even glamour of spiritual life. So, for example, many times, we own a yoga studio, right? So I'm around people all the time. And there's a very important stage when we become interested in spiritual life where we become interested in it, but it's really mixed with a lot of, basically materialistic impulses. So it's not uncommon for us to go and spend $500 on yoga apparel, thinking to myself, I want to look like a yogi now. You know what I mean? Like I like doing yoga postures and like talking about peace, and like I want to look that way. I want to look good doing it, Or there's a lot, I won't go on because you get the idea. This is called spiritual materialism. And in Ren Butler's book, The Archetypal Universe, when he's talking about Jupiter Neptune trines, one of the key words that he uses is spiritual materialism. There's the potential to become enamored for the ego to get high on itself because it is spiritual. So it's the kind of puffed up religiosity, right? And there's a glamour in spiritual life that is a beautiful part of spiritual life. That, in fact, in the Bhakti tradition, the Lord is said to have a potency called Yogamaya. And Yogamaya has the ability to basically make us fall in love with the divine, make us just crazy about being a spiritual being and falling in love with God. And it's like that. So God has the power, you might say, to allure us into spiritual life. And that's not exactly what we're talking about. That could be an indication of Jupiter Neptune as well. You could see Jupiter Neptune as the call, the attraction, the spiritual enthusiasm, or the emotional excitement about spiritual life. That's authentic and beautiful and great. However, what you notice in both of these mantras from the Sri Upanishad, please remove your dazzling effulgence so that I may see you as you are. So in other words, in this text, one of the things that's being said is that it's possible to actually miss the point of aspiring to connect personally with the divine because we become enamored by spiritual life, which is sort of like the effulgent light pouring off the body of God. That's how the Sri Upanishad talks about it. You can get, in other words, it's kind of like how many of you guys have ever, met somebody and you're enamored by their clothing and their smile and their smell and their like that. And those things, are they false? Is that like false information? No, it's true information, right? You're picking up something really true about that person. They do smell good. They do look good. You like their clothes or whatever. But most of the time in real relationships, we say, you got to get to know the real person behind the perfume, behind the cologne, behind the dress, behind the talk, whatever. You have to get to know the real thing. Similarly, Sri Upanishad saying the exact same thing here. I'll read the 15th one more time. "O my Lord, sustainer of all things, your real face is covered by your dazzling effulgence. Kindly remove that covering and exhibit yourself to your pure devotee." We have to be very careful about getting enamored with spiritual things, enamored with ourselves as spiritual practitioners. I'm certainly not like the authority of anything, but I can tell you that just yesterday I scanned through YouTube and I was looking, I was just checking out what kinds of astrologers are doing what out there and just getting a sense for how other people do things, picking up some good ideas here or there maybe. But I also saw a lot of people who were preaching the gospel of, here is how to get what you want using astrology. Here's how to change your fate so that you have what you want, you realize what you realize your highest potential, all of this. And it was accompanied by so much talk of crystals and channeling and ascended masters and so many things, right? So many things. Not to say that this is, some of that stuff is really real and authentic. And I have friends that I think of as having real spiritual talents and skills. We also have to remember, though, that one of the instructions of the Yoga Sutras and the yogic tradition in general is that as one progresses in spiritual life, the temptation to be enamored of the spiritual effulgence of the divine grows, because we start to take it on and other people become impressed with us because we are taking on some of that quality, or we've picked up on some of it. We have a little glint of it in our eye. We have to remember that's not ours, right? It's not ours. We're not in possession of that. It's not about our ego. On the other hand, we also have to remember that the mystical powers of the yogis, the siddhis that can be obtained through rigorous practice over a long period of time, similar to the way that an incredible improvisational musician will develop incredible creative powers over lots of time with practice. First of all, those things aren't obtained without practice. So people selling spirituality as something easy, as a gimmick, just pop on this 8-minute alpha theta wave thing, and soon you'll be talking to your angels and all of this stuff. One of the potential problems with all of this is that there is no great spiritual tradition on our planet, whether you're looking at the Buddhists or the yogis or contemplative Christians or even great shamanic traditions around the world. They all require practice, and practice over time is what makes one heavy and what potentially gives one mystical powers. But even then, again, mantra 15, kindly remove that dazzling effulgence. That's not the goal. It's not the point. It may come up somewhere in there, and there are these realms. There's so many different realms filled with all sorts of different mystical things. But it's like New York City. You know what I mean? If you live there for long enough, you're no longer enamored by the lights. Do you know what I'm saying? You're no longer enamored by the charade of lights and powers and so forth. So I, trying to, without becoming intolerant or judgy of anyone or anything in particular, I would just say, beware of people who try to make spiritual life out as though it is something that is easy, or as though the point of spiritual life is to manifest something that you want or wish for. That these often enough, these places that people want you to go in are enamored of spiritual power, but are not legitimately pursuing the source of that power. Now, you could agree or disagree with that philosophically. The mantra 15, one more time. O my Lord, sustainer of all that lives, your real face is covered by your dazzling effulgence. Kindly remove that covering and exhibit yourself to your pure devotee. So that's one thing that can come up with Jupiter Neptune, is the spiritual mirage. However, we're not supposed to renounce the material world either. We're not supposed to we may be pursuing the divine full-heartedly or whatever. That doesn't mean that we're supposed to reject things that we don't feel are spiritual, which interestingly enough is a Jupiter-Neptune tendency. Jupiter-Neptune in the desire to unify, seek oneness, etc. Not only can Jupiter-Neptune become enamored of spiritual, the spiritual effulgence, but it can also, Jupiter-Neptune can also suggest that everything should be spiritualized, and in order to do that, one ironically has to take a kind of damning attitude. There's a desire to include and bring everything together, but in order to do that, anything that's considered outside the purview of that spiritual vision has to be sort of cast aside or sort of damned or what have you. Well, mantra 11 tells us that's not the point either. Here's mantra 11 of the Sri Upanishad. Only one who can learn the process of nescience, that's ignorance, and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. I'll read that one more time. Only one who can learn the process of ignorance in the world, worldly materialistic ignorance, let's call it nescience, and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. See, it's like, in a sense, the world becomes sanctified. All material experiences are capable of being used in service to the divine and as a part of our spiritual growth when we see everything as spiritual. But that vision can be a part of what we get from a Jupiter Neptune trine. Again, you'll find Richard Tarnas talking about this at length in Cosmos and Psyche. Ren Butler talks about it at length in Archetypal Universe. This is something astrologers know about Jupiter and Neptune, the potential to spiritualize things, and the desire to but the desire to also potentially have a kind of ironic rigidity about whatever isn't considered spiritual, to be religious or spiritual in a way that's full of itself, full of the glamour of spiritual life again. But no, Sri Upanishad is telling us, first of all, don't be enamored of the spiritual effulgence. Go right to the source. Seek the source, not the mystical powers and realms associated with it. Not trying to get a spiritual Ferrari here. Only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. We have to figure out how to be in this world and how to spiritualize our lives as we go. Much of that requires that we accept the circumstances of our karma, and the real flexibility is found in our consciousness and how we go through that experience, not in being able to change it literally. The trap of literalism, of thinking about karma literally, leads us to overcompensation, where we then say, oh, you can change anything. That's old, outdated stuff. No, there's so much of life that is not within our control, but it's all there for our education if we can see it that way. And this is telling you this all the way back from 3,000 years ago. 3,000 plus years ago that the Sri Upanishad was thought to be written by scholars, orally thought to be even older than that. And this is telling you right there, that long ago, nope, side by side, you have to learn something about the world of ignorance as you are learning about transcendental things at the same time. That's a view of karma that is very, very old. So important to know that. Next, here's another thing to think about. Sri Upanishad Mantra 9, those who are engaged in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the so-called culture of knowledge. Ooh, that sounds interesting. Well, let's talk about that one. Those who are engaged in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. First of all, there's two extremes, right? Sometimes people say, well, I'm going to reject the world and I'm going to be just doing spiritual things, and that's it. Because the world isn't real. It's just an illusion, or it's fallen, or it's stained, or whatever. Take this really renounced view. Or on the other hand, people will go to the opposite extreme and say, well, I can't find the truth. All truths are good. So, I consider myself spiritual, not religious. And basically I just do what I want. And that is also potentially dangerous. What to speak of people who don't care anything of spiritual life and are just, fully immersed in consumerist, materialist culture, trying to get ahead, trying to be happy in material things with no thought of spiritual life. Either way, we enter into very dark spaces karmically when that's how we behave. There are consequences for that. The consequences are not punitive in the sense of someone being like, that's off limits, and crack you on the wrist. No, those dimensions exist because our desires are honored by the universe, but the way in which our desires are granted to us is always educational, so that we can learn from them. Well, that's how it works. So those who are engaged in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Ouch, that doesn't sound good. However, worse still are those engaged in the so-called culture of knowledge. What does that mean? Well, this is, again, thousands of years old. And what are we talking about? We're talking about people who say, for example, basically it's the same version of knowledge that you might find in total materialist, secular materialist science classes. Nothing has any inherent meaning. Everything is just purely material. There's no greater substance, etc. This Sri Upanishad, thousands of years ago, is saying getting invested in trying to have power over people and over material nature because of how much you know mentally or philosophically is actually worse than just being plain ignorant. So to compare it, let's just say, you're someone who just can't stop drinking and eating, and that's just all you do. Well, that's, pretty ignorant. If that's the extent of your existence, you can just do nothing but eat and drink. That's a problem. You're going to, that leads to a region of ignorance. Your karma is going to, your desire will be granted. You can eat and drink. You have the freedom to do that, but you'll learn through being in this region of sort of ignorance. On the other hand, people who maybe rise on the surface seem like they are more intelligent than that, but actually all they're doing is trying to manipulate the forces of material nature, like a corporate capitalist bigwig or a scientist who has no belief in anything beyond, who creates the nuclear bomb, or what do you know what I'm saying? I'm just kind of throwing things out there. That the attempt to become powerful over material nature and to manipulate it through heady intelligence, Sri Upanishad is saying that's actually worse. Okay, what does this have to do with Jupiter Neptune? Jupiter Neptune is, again, one of the things that Jupiter Neptune often inspires within us when we're not living a spiritual life. Like, one of the ways you can see it manifest in the world is through the emphasis on the culture of knowledge. That we know more now than we've ever known. We're going farther in our understanding than we've ever gone. And there's something about this that gets everybody excited. And I'm going to pick on someone that I'm not trying to judge his eternal soul or anything. But like, let's say Neil deGrasse Tyson, who does the Cosmos series, like Carl Sagan did or whatever. Now, I personally like to learn about the universe, so I'm not against Cosmos or even against Neil deGrasse Tyson or anything like that. But there is a tendency that people have to sometimes think about the expansion of human knowledge about the material cosmos, and to think about that as the pinnacle of human achievement. Oh, that's the pinnacle of the human mind's achievement, or something like that. This is also very Jupiter Neptune. There's a kind of academic or philosophical knowledge-based hubris that can come up. Again, Sri Upanishad's telling us it's actually, in some ways, right, that's actually can be worse than someone who's just can't stop eating and drinking all day. Why? Because that person is essentially in front of the entire society, giving them false knowledge about reality, right? Spiritual people can do this as well, when spiritual people stand on platforms and tell people that the only thing that they should think about is developing their mystic powers, or that that the only thing that's real is doing something fantastic with the current astrology so they can get some kind of goodie. It's the same kind of abuse. One is a spiritual, slightly spiritualized form of abuse, and the other one is much more material. But just note that we have a Hindu Upanishad thousands of years ago, clearly demarcating the differences in terms of which kind of instruction is healthy and which isn't. And each one of these, I was just struck today when I was preparing this by looking at how specifically Jupiter, Uranus, the instructions of the Sri Upanishad are. I find it interesting that I started taking a course on the Sri Upanishad as Jupiter was coming into a trine with Neptune. So very important. And a lot of people, this is just, again, my observation, having immersed myself in spiritual, different comparative religious traditions for a long time now at a much deeper level, is that a lot of people in New Age culture will talk about things of which they have no real understanding of in terms of the history of religious or spiritual or philosophical traditions on the planet. So, that all of that we have to be very careful of right now, because Jupiter with a trine to Neptune is also on my lists is the bad guru. And that bad guru, again, could be an academic professor that you have, or a spiritual person who's using a platform in a way that is unknowingly enamored with the sort of the spiritual effulgence that we talked about with Mantra 15. Okay, so those are just some interesting things to consider. Here's mantra 8, to the point that I was making just a minute ago. Such a person must know, in fact, the greatest of all, who is unembodied, omniscient, beyond reproach, without veins, pure and uncontaminate, the self-sufficient philosopher who is awarding everyone's desire since time immemorial. That last part, who is awarding everyone's desire since time immemorial. Here's the thing about Jupiter Neptune. You can go for your desire, and oftentimes you'll get it. That's one of the things that people love about Jupiter Neptune. You'll get it. And this mantra confirms that, in fact, the divine is awarding everyone's desire since time immemorial. But this text also goes on to say that the highest desire of all is to desire intimate, loving knowledge and personal contact with the divine. That when that fills our hearts, in a sense, anything in the material world can be used, dovetailed with that process, with the development of that love. Anything. That's why, and that's why we don't get enamored by one thing versus another in the material world. That's why it's not the point to change your material karma, one thing versus the other. Your karma changes naturally when you start this process anyway. Okay. Here's mantra 7, one who always sees all living entities as spiritual sparks, in quality one with the Lord, becomes a true knower of things. What is there as illusion or anxiety for him? There is also a sense in which Jupiter Neptune fills us with compassion. One of the things you'll find a lot of people writing about with Jupiter Neptune is the impulse to be humanitarian, compassionate, forgiving, allowing, accepting, tolerant. And those things are a beautiful part of Jupiter Neptune. You can find a deep wellspring of compassion and emotional healing and forgiveness with Jupiter Neptune. Very important. And tolerance, patience with diversity, in the sense that everything is actually controlled, owned, and a part of God. You know, everything is under divine direction. We have free will, but we're being directed. Mysterious combination of how that works. We're each autonomous souls, different from, but also in quality the same as the divine. And the Sri Upanishad again says that when we say a person who sees everything, this is mantra 6, a person who sees everything in relation to the Supreme Lord sees all entities as his part and parcels, sees the Supreme Lord within everything, never hates anything nor any being. So similarly, compassion, tolerance, patience is built when we learn to see everything as a part of a divine whole, which Jupiter Neptune can also do. The very first verse, which is also a great one to end on here. Everything inanimate or animate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself which are set aside as his quota, and one must not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. This is a beautiful mantra from the Sri Upanishad, and it says essentially that we don't hanker or crave for things that are excessive. This is maybe one of the most important teachings with Jupiter Neptune. The things will grow and become big, which is an opportunity to give back, to become generous. One of the key lines that adjectives that you'll hear Richard Tarnas talk about, Ren Butler, again, these are great archetypal astrologers, Jupiter, Neptune, generosity, the desire to give. So when you have something in the material world that is more than what you need, you're overflowing. The natural spiritual tendency is to give, to become generous, not to hoard, not to try to build up, not to want more than you need. Because why? Because you recognize that anything you have is the energy of the Lord, is the energy of the divine. And so it's shared with all beings. So there's no desire to hold or possess or grab it like that. On the other hand, one of the things you should always be careful of with Jupiter Neptune is the potential to give too much, to lack boundaries, and to overextend yourself or to overgive, to give beyond what you have, and to potentially deplete what is your own quota, the things that you actually need. The boundary between that is sometimes very hard to discern. So, it takes a little reflection. Jupiter Neptune transits, as you can see, there's a lot going on with them. So I hope that today's talk and some inclusions of the Sri Ishopanishad have been interesting for everybody, and hopefully you take all of this, put it in your crock pot, your soupy watery mix with so much water energy, and you take something away that's really good and helpful for you. So I'm going to look at questions now if there are any. If Jupiter is conducive to life with heat and moisture, Spencer says, too much of those qualities can lead to mold and rot. Yeah, precisely. That's really good. What are your thoughts on the paradox of a financial astrologer? Well, I mean, not every astrologer is in knowledge of or embracing the early philosophical roots of the tradition, which are deeply spiritual, and there's an ethic to them. And it's also true that the entire history of astrology, from the dawn of astrology to present, is not filled with purely one kind of astrology versus another, one kind of ethic or philosophical or spiritual or religious value versus another. So it's like, not all ancient astrologers would have agreed, probably with everything in the Sri Ishopanishad, but I think they would have had much more in common with the Sri Ishopanishad than a lot of the New Age stuff that you see today. That's for sure. But on the other hand, I think that interest in material topics within the realm of astrology is very old. And so astrologers have always been dealing with people who come to them wanting to know about material fortune. So I don't condemn it in my own practice. If someone comes and says, tell me about money, I'm going to do my best to help them with that. I just try to do so in a way that emphasizes that your material financial karma is not what defines your happiness. That's the important thing to get to. So this is the Sri Ishopanishad, which I explained earlier as one of the, Spencer asked what book you're reading from. Sri Ishopanishad, which is one of the, Upanishads are philosophical commentaries on the Vedas. And so this one comes with the Yajur Veda and is just very, very beautiful. So check it out. The Cyber Ferrari came out again. I can't help it. I can't bust out the Cyber Ferrari from time to time. So people saying hello, hi. Important not to get over-identified with ourselves as a vessel. Yes. Let's hear it for dreams coming true. Unless they're bad dreams, in which case we're not as excited about them. Nancy, I'm doing exactly this, taking on way too much rather than be in the present moment. I'm losing things as well as distracted, focus is off. Just speaking to your comment about dreams, Nancy, one of my teachers in the Bhakti tradition says, sometimes will say to me that one of the messages of the great teachers in the Bhakti lineage is to pray the prayer, universe, Lord, divine, however you like to address. I don't know what I need. I'm not in possession of the knowledge to know what I need, or to know if I received what I need, if it would lead in the right way, or if it would give me the right things. And so I ask that you give me only what I need, and give me the strength to accept whatever I need in the right way. That's a brave prayer. It's really scary to actually pray that prayer, but from my own perspective, that's one of the important things when it comes to dreams. I think it's great to have dreams, but you're asking for things. One of the top things at my list before I ask for anything is to also now, from my teachers having taught me this, to make sure that I also say, and if this isn't what I need, if this isn't what I want, if this won't help me get closer to you in heart and in life, then don't give it to me, because I don't want it. And do I dare pray that prayer? You know what I mean? Like, I shake sometimes, even kind of like, oh my God. Anyway. Guru, remover of darkness. Yes. So saying there's different etymological connections that different ways of reading the word. One of the meanings of guru, heavy, but also remover, removing darkness. Very good. And certainly Jupiter Neptune can be the effulgence that I was talking about not getting lost in, the reverse of that is also the illumination that's possible under Jupiter Neptune. So someone to really, a teacher to enter your life, to transmission to come through, to be illuminating in some respect. If I'm up at bat in the bottom of the ninth and my team has a man on base but is down by a run, I'm not going to be thinking about how things might not work out at him. Yeah, I wouldn't either, because at that point, you're in Leela, you're in play, and probably if anything has made you a professional athlete at the level, being in a big game or something like that, and you're hoping to win, it's being able to take it on the chin when you don't. And I think that one of the things that allows us to be in the headspace of a game, a Leela, a spiritual pastime, is the ability to recognize that it's just a game. So if you recognize that it's just a game, then you're not going to throw a temper tantrum and take your bat and go trash the dugout if you don't get that hit in the bottom of the ninth inning. I think that's more the point than being on plate, being like, how might this go wrong? But that's a good point, Ra. It's important. It's not to say that you walk around life like not entering into things fully with your heart. It's just, it's like if you recognize that the nature of impermanence and this kind of spiritual material distinction that we're talking about, again, if your team loses, if you don't get what you want, or things don't work out, or if things do, you're not overly taken by it. You can't be taken down. You can't be puffed up. Either way, I'm kind of like, when I was a kid, I remember this very well with my football coach. So I played football for a while. My football coach, no celebrating when you get a touchdown. You just hand the ball to the ref. And I would be like, oh my God, that's such a bummer. It's so stress. It's like, can we just have a little bit of fun? Because he was really emphasizing, like, you don't get proud of your accomplishments, or you'll get cocky, and that's what comes before a fall, before a mess up that could cost your team something, a penalty or whatever, or some sense of yourself as big that causes you to not pay attention to the fundamentals. And so you just hand that ball to the ref. Okay, fine. I remember a debate that we had with the coach, and the debate was like, on the other hand, if you're always, this is like us philosopher 8th grade boys talking to the football coach, we said, on the other hand, coach, if you're too serious and too like strict, you could be too uptight, and being too uptight could make you mess up in a game too, couldn't it? And he looked at us and he was just like, you guys are too smart for your own good, like. And so we came up with a compromise, which was like, moderate celebration. Okay. What do you see in the NFL over the past years? You've seen the commentators like, they should just hand the ball to the coach. There's no excessive celebrating. Then they got penalties that were put in for excessive celebrating like that. And then, and then it came back to, now, well, maybe it's good for the revenue and the sales if we let them excessively celebrate. And like all of this, so the back and forth of it, though, philosophically, what's happened in the NFL over the past 5 years, as someone who unfortunately is into football, I've just programmed since I've been born. Hopefully I'll give it up someday. But at any rate, the same philosophical thing is right there. So, all right. So you're saying I shouldn't bet my rent money on a Packers Super Bowl victory after their dominating preseason victory? Yes. Yeah, you want to be careful about that. How long does the transit last for? It's, a couple more. Well, I already mentioned that one earlier. Okay. Barry Sanders was like that. All business, act like you've been there before. Yeah, exactly. You know the drill. So anyway, somewhere between the being too uptight and too loose about our engagement in the world is probably the right answer. That's the point we're trying to make today. It was the potential to go to extremes in either direction with Jupiter Neptune. So that's what I've got for today. Nice talk on Jupiter Trine Neptune. I appreciate everyone tuning in. If you'd like to follow me or learn more about my work, you can check out www.nightlightastrology.com. You can check out the readings that I offer, the courses that I offer. Next course is starting in November. I also have a new announcement, speaking of teachers and apprentices and transmissions and stuff like that, I am offering a new form of my apprenticeship, my private apprenticeship program, which I'll be announcing after I get it organized, probably after Mercury goes direct and a little bit later this month. So stay tuned for that as well. All right, guys, take care. Have a good one. Bye.